Hello. Happy Monday. Noelle will be joining me shortly, and we are going to look at the D3 wines from last week's exam for Wines of the World for the WSET diploma. And boy, there were some interesting ones here. So very much looking forward to talking with Noelle about them and kind of going over some of the thinking, behind how we would have approached these flights and very common laterals that I know I probably would have called myself. I don't think I would have gotten many of these wines myself. Oh, there's Noelle. Let's get her going. I think we're going. There we go.
Hey. Hey. Yeah, you and I've chatted briefly about this, and I think we're both in agreement that we're glad we didn't have these wines.
Yes. Oh boy.
If it makes anyone feel any better, yeah, the examiners just continue to prove, as we say, that they will throw you curveballs. They will put in whatever the heck they want. So there were some kind things, I think, here, but there were definitely some doozies is the term I used. And again, so Amber and I are going to go over these and our thoughts. I did look up some text sheets. I can't find a lot of text sheets, which
yeah.
But yeah, if you took the exam and you didn't nail the wines, please don't panic, because Amber and I did not on our exams. We still passed. We still earned our diploma. So the fact that maybe you miscalled the country or the variety, whatever, that is not going to sink you. Did you describe the wine correctly? Did you analyze quality? Those are much more important things. So yeah, we'll get going and we'll go back and forth, I think, on the flights. And you've got variety.
Yep. And you describe them as curveballs, and I do agree, but I would say they're still fair in that, these are distinctive wines that show the style. They certainly are in the syllabus. And the only curveball really would be is if, you kind of bought into the head games that Noelle and I have really cautioned against so many times. Yes, here's what the examiners may have featured in the past, but that doesn't mean they can't feature something else. And so the people that locked into those head games of trying to guess what the wines were going to be and what's going to be in the exam, those were the ones that had the biggest curves. Because again, overall, it is still very fair.
It is. And we're not going to play Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, these were easy, or, oh, you should have picked up on this. We didn't sit the exam. So we have been in your shoes, but we were not in your exact shoes. So we're definitely not going to say that this was a gimme whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So starting with the grape flight, it was Chardonnay.
Yeah.
And I feel so bad for the folks that was following the blind tasting and theory webinar series, because Chardonnay was going to be is definitely one of the big grapes I was going to cover, but I got sick with COVID that week. And leading up to the exams with, all the different appointments and catching up, I just couldn't make up that webinar. And so it's like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh. With that said, this was a very interesting Chardonnay flight, because there was no French Chardonnay whatsoever, no Chablis, no Brother Burgundy, and no California Chardonnays with that. No Australian Chardonnays either with that. So where in the world are we now with that? So the wines that they featured was one from New Zealand, from Marlborough. And so this is not completely out of left field, because a New Zealand Chard has been featured before in the exam. It was part of a country flight for New Zealand. Yep, no Oregon with that. The Oregon, you'll get your due here when Noelle comes up with that. But yeah, so a New Zealand Chardonnay has been featured, and looking at the notes for it, the tell for New Zealand Chardonnay, and this is going to be kind of tough for a lot of folks that don't have a lot of experience tasting New Zealand Chards, because we all know Sauv Blanc, Sauv Blanc, Sauv Blanc. And I know it's in the US, it was very, very difficult to find anything outside of a Sauv Blanc from New Zealand. So you really kind of have to hunt. But a type that is kind of emerging, and there's always going to be producers that do things a little different, but, the examiners aren't trying to trick you. So they want to kind of give you more of that benchmark, is a lot of kind of a reductive note with the Chardonnays. And so this particular one from Marlboro, with the dog point, looking at the notes there, it did spend time being barrel fermented with that and oak, neutral oak, but they didn't do any batonnage. And so a lot of people instantly think, oak's going to introduce oxygen, and it is going to introduce some subtle oxidation. But where you get a lot of those oxidative notes is opening up that bung and sticking in the batonnage tool and stirring around. And so not really going through batonnage contributes towards that reductive style. It kind of shows up in kind of that smoky, flinty, almost toasty note. You might even think of it along the lines of picking up oak, but that reductive note. Camus River is a very good example if you can get your hands on it. Not the one featured on this exam, but it's just a really good one to practice with. And the fruit in New Zealand, kind of that more moderate climate with some cooling influence. It's surrounded by ocean, so it's going to have this cooling influence. The second one was from South Africa with that. And this one would have a lot more overt oak influence. Only 15% new oak with that in 12 months, but very ripe tropical fruit with it, and then oak, the caramel, the vanilla. A couple of the tasting notes I saw reviews had oatmeal, which I thought was interesting. So maybe kind of think of, oatmeal, maybe adding like a little of the cinnamon and things like that on top on that for the kind of oak spice. Bigger body, even though still medium alcohol, 13.5%, but that ripeness of fruit, that warm climate. And if people that did pick up on this and went straight to California, you got so many overlapping marks. So definitely don't stress out on that. The third one was from Chile. And Chile's ones, Chardonnays from Chile have popped up a few times on both the Grape Flight and even like mixed bag. And they always tend to be the good value, like under $10, 10 pounds, that kind of range. And this was very much true, that form from Chile. Interesting looking at their text notes for this one from Los Boldos. It's almost like they treated it like a Sauv Blanc. All stainless steel ferment, very cool fermentation temperatures, 13 to 15 degrees Celsius. And to put that in context, a lot of shards are more in that, 16 to 20. Some of the barrel fermented shards go up to 22 degrees Celsius. So they really wanted to maintain aromatics on it. And so this one I can kind of see actually being a little troublesome, in that some people might have thought Sauv Blanc on that. Chile.
And you've got your chili greenness too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And so looking at this flight, looking at that kind of smoky, flinty notes that New Zealand Chardonnays tend to have, the fact that you can get some oaky Sauv Blancs when you think of like a Napa Fumé Blanc.
Yeah.
On that, you can go to Bordeaux.
Yeah.
Some of the Cru Classé Bordeaux, McGravs. I could see myself calling this a Sauvignon Blanc flight with that.
I've heard that. I've heard that, and Chenin have been the two laterals that I've heard.
Chenin overlaps so much with Chardonnay, so you could definitely go there.
Yeah.
And so if you didn't nail this as Chardonnay, you're going to hear Noelle and I like a broken record, throughout this live. Don't stress over that.
Yeah.
Over 90% of your points came from your tasting note and your logic. And even if you have the wrong conclusion, the examiners will give you points for good, solid logic.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that was when I first saw it was Chardonnay, I was like, oh, and then I'm looking at the details. I'm like, there's nothing from France. There's nothing from the US. Like that's a tricky one. So fair, but tricky. Yeah. Anything else to add on that?
No, that was definitely with the Chardonnays. I mean, a lot of winemaking influences went into play, and so you can kind of geek out and go down those rabbit holes with that. And to really nail this as Chardonnay, I think you did have to have some familiarity, particularly with the New Zealand style. The Banker was the South African one with the oak, but there was another kind of with the Chilean one pulling you away from it, and then that New Zealand one that could get you to disregard that Banker.
Yeah. So variety. Next is country. So country was the United States. And I have heard all over the board for country. I have heard France, I have heard South Africa, and Australia. So what these all had in common was over 14% alcohol, at least on the label. All saw some oak and they all should have had riper fruit character. But nonetheless, that could still put you in France because you could still, you know, there's still your warm areas of France. So don't stress if you stuck in the old world with this. And especially the first two wines, not a lot of help. Pinot from Dundee Hills from Domaine Drouhin in Oregon, 14% alcohol, aged in French oak. I can't find the details, how long or what percentage new, but this was probably a much riper style Pinot. But Domaine Drouhin, as you know, also has their, you know, French counterparts. So they could do, it could be mistaken for a, you know, a riper style of Burgundy Pinot Noir easily. Could be mistaken for something out of Australia. And then they had a Washington State wine. So exciting. Is that I probably would not have called it Washington State. So it was Chateau Ste. Michelle, Indian Wells Cabernet. And per their website, it says our warm climate, ripe, jammy, New World style of Cabernet Sauvignon. However, it sounds like the oak was really well integrated. So it maybe didn't come across that oaky. It sounds like the alcohol was really well integrated. So it didn't come across, it was just kind of nice and pleasantly warming. It wasn't this hot that you would go, oh, that is putting me in a really warm climate. So,
and it's nothing like a Napa or Napa Cabernet too. It doesn't have that lushness.
Right. And so, and interestingly, so it's 85% Cab and then 13% Syrah. So I know someone who called it Syrah. Makes sense. I mean, you know, there is that blend of Syrah in there. And so past oak regimes I found was around 30% new American, 5% new French. So a little bit of new. This is a $20 bottle of wine, easy to drink, does have a little RS on it. So that might have also pushed you more into the new world. But those first two wines, Pinot and Cab, I mean, those can be anywhere. So I suspect this last wine was supposed to be the Banker, but it doesn't sound like it really went that way. So I need to try this wine because I've heard Grenache. I've heard like a bigger, bolder Gamay for this. So it was a Old Vine Zin, relatively inexpensive at $16 a bottle. So gnarly head, sourced from old vines, 35 to 80 years old. Combination of French and American oak. I cannot find details as to new, how long, any of that. So this is a style that I don't think a lot of people outside the US really have. I had California as my region on my exam, and I had a higher quality Zinfandel. And to me, it was clearly Zinfandel. That was definitely a Banker. This is pretty inexpensive. $16. There's some manipulation going on there. I can see where somebody went a different direction with this. But I think between the three, this was intended to be the one that pushed you into the US. It just sounds like people weren't sure where to go. They thought maybe it was Grenache. Makes sense. Very red fruited, higher alcohol, softer tannins. So again, I think with this flight, if you described things correctly, if you assessed your quality pretty well, you know, said they were good, they weren't really outstanding examples. I suppose the Pinot maybe could be outstanding. I think you're going to be fine. Just keep that Pac-Man in mind, that you're just kind of gobbling up some points here and there. I did not call my country correctly, so still managed to pass. So don't fret if you, to use your term, fret a lot. Don't fret if you went to a different country for this, because this was a little bit tricky, and I think you could be placed in a variety of areas. So yeah.
So I saw a couple of comments here, and I don't know if our commenters will clarify them, but somebody said they said those wines said Southern Hemisphere in the beginning. And I didn't know if it's something like on their sheet, because that would be really, really confusing if they said, you know, these wines are the Southern Hemisphere. I don't know anything about it, or if it's just to them in the glass, the wines scream Southern Hemisphere. So if our commenters could clarify that, that would be kind of good, because we saw two different people comment on that, since obviously the U.S. is not in the Southern Hemisphere with that.
No, New World, but
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, for the Chardonnay flight. Okay.
Oh, yeah. All
For
okay.
the
All the
Chard.
wines were Southern Hemisphere. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So yeah, for the grape flight, they mentioned all the wines were from the Southern Hemisphere. So that was actually really helpful for them.
Hmm.
I don't know where I would have gone that with that.
Oh.
That
Hmm.
actually might have helped me pull me back to Chardonnay. Actually, thinking about that
I feel like that
because
would have pushed me to Sauv Blanc.
well,
I don't know.
yeah. I mean, but where the flinty Sauv Blanc is, the smoky flinty.
I don't know.
That one would be, I mean, the oaky one, I would go maybe Margaret River, thinking it's a Sauv Blanc Semillon blend for the oak one. Um, the
South
obviously kind of
Africa?
green one, that would be New Zealand.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, the Flint one, I mean, maybe I guess I would have to go South Africa thinking, but
yeah.
a lot of the South African Sauv Blancs I've had haven't been that way. But who knows? Who knows? But that was an interesting context with that. So thank you guys to our commentators, Peter and our Oregon sommelier with that.
Oh, yeah. And if you called the oaked one Margaret River, that makes total sense.
Yeah,
Goodness gracious. That makes total sense. Yeah.
yeah,
Nope.
definitely getting a lot of points with that. But
I
yeah, going back to the country flight, I well, super excited for us being Washingtonians, seeing a
know.
Washington Y on it. Thinking about it, it's like, oh, that's kind of hard because
Yeah.
it's not a Napa cab, and when a lot of people that even people in the U.S. American Cabernet, for better or worse, that benchmark is Napa and Washington Cabernets. I mean, Noelle and I will tell you how delicious they are, but they're very
Mm-hmm.
different on it.
They are, and I mean that is a made for the mainstream consumer brand.
Mm-hmm.
It is not going to have those lovely herbal pyrazine notes because they're going to get mainstream consumers don't really want that. So
Yeah,
if you're, I suspect if you're looking for your cab notes, you're maybe really having to hunt for them because the that's not what this wine style, the Chateau Saint Michelle Indian Wells, is smoother tannins and that riper fruit and not a lot of herbal stuff. So
I would call it a Syrah too. I mean, it's got a little Syrah blend in, like you mentioned, but it
yeah,
does. Being very familiar with that wine, there's a lot of it that makes me think Syrah, and so I can
yeah,
see myself going to Australia with this
yeah,
flight. Pinot
totally.
Noir, thinking that's a Syrah, and Zinfandel. Yeah, maybe a Grenache, a McLaren Vale Grenache, or a Jamier.
Yeah,
Maybe they could give you two Syrahs and play that mind game with that.
yeah. Old
So yeah,
vine Grenache. Yeah.
yeah.
So I would not sweat it if you were in a different country.
Or
Sounds like a lot of you were.
South
Huh?
Africa.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Potentially that Zen, maybe some people think that Zen is a pinotage
totally.
with
Yep.
that. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, again, challenging flight.
Yep.
So going on to the second paper with that regional flight, it was the Loire. And so here they featured some wines that they've kind of featured before and some things that are just a little slightly different. They featured a Pouilly Fumé, and it is the exact same Pouilly Fumé that they featured last May for my exam.
For you? Oh,
with it.
okay. Okay.
So I know that wine very, very well. I did not call it a Pouilly Fumé. I called it a Sancerre, but hey, I got close
Pretty
with
darn
that.
close. I think you're fine.
But it is, so the wine, Domaine Chatelain, Chailloux, that vineyard site is from, means hot stones. And so it's a little bit of a warmer site there. And so it had riper fruit on it. And it did give me a little bit of pause of kind of like, is this Loire or is it somewhere a little warmer? Because the fruit tasted warmer. Different vintage I had, by the way, than versus the vintage I had here. And so again, your mileage may vary. But I remember thinking about that. It's like, is this cool climate? Ultimately, what drew me back to Loire was the acidity, just that racing acidity, and then how it finished. I've talked often is, when you're tasting a wine, think about that last kiss it gives you. Is that kiss ending on something savory, or is it ending on something kind of sweet with scare quotes, more like fruit? Is it ending on fruit? A lot of New World wines, that last kiss ends on fruit, while a lot of Old World wines, it ends on something savory. And that was the case that nailed me back to the Loire, was it ended on kind of that stony savoriness on it. The second wine that they featured was a Vouvray Demi-Sec. And they've featured that before, but it's been almost 13 years since the last time they did a demi-sec Vouvray. Often when they feature Vouvray, it tends to be the drier sec. Now, demi-sec, a lot of people hear that and they think it's going to be super, super sweet, but usually it's more like off-dry. And they do like featuring that, especially with Chenin and especially on Loire flights. Often it's a Coteau du Léon that they feature that's got that same kind of off-dry, little late harvest, maybe some slight botrytis, but this is not going to be a wine that screams botrytis at all. It's more just picking up on the acidity with, and, you know, kind of that lanolin aspect of Chenin, and then that little bit of sweetness to it. And then the last wine was a red. They went to Chinon, and it looks like it was actually a little bit more of a robust Chinon. The Cabernet Franc, often, you know, little greener notes. They don't macerate it as long. Like you think of like the bistro wines that you have at the cafes there in Paris. You know, those are only getting those, you know, 6 to 8 day macerations. Well, this one, warmer vintage. And obviously producers, older vines going for a more robust style, 30 days maceration. So this is going to be, you know, a Cab Franc that has a little bit more of the Cabernet character of Cab Franc on it. So looking at a lot of things that what people look at, you have a really dry, racy white wine. You've got a white wine that's got a hint of sweetness. And then you've got a red that, even though it's a little bit more robust, would still have some cool climate characters. It's led by red fruit, likely some floral notes, likely some spice. I doubt it had a lot of the green notes just from reading the description and reading a lot of reviews and of the vintage, but those that took the exam, by all means, let us know on it. And so you're kind of thinking and placing yourself in different areas. And I can see, like myself, you know, just thinking here, you know, I could be thinking maybe the Rheingau in Germany. You know, you could have a dry Riesling, a Trocken Riesling. You could have, you know, a Spätlesen or an Auslesen, just a little off dry. And then you could have a Pinot Noir. And now granted, the Pinot Noir would be a little less in body and tannins compared to the Chinon, but there could be that kind of confusion that could lead you there. And so that would be one area that kind of jumps out. Is there an area that might jump out for you for a region?
No, I mean, I have not actually heard from anybody. Most people that I've talked to did call it Loire, so yay. I was thinking, I was like, gosh, where else could you go? I mean, somewhere northern Italy, but I really don't. I mean,
it's that little off dry wine. I think that was the banker, really.
Yeah.
Because wines with
Bordeaux.
sweetness,
Could you be placed in Bordeaux?
you would expect it to be sweeter with the Sauterne.
Yeah.
I mean, sweet wines in general kind of helps, you know, reduce
Yeah.
your big wide world. And wines that have only just a little bit of sweetness, you know, Alsace, you know, you may be thinking Alsace. Again, Pinot Noir could be there.
Yeah.
We had a comment from our Southern Oregon som that took the exam, more red bell pepper instead of green bell pepper. So that makes perfect sense reading that description there. But yeah, it's kind of, where did you place that wine with that little hint of sweetness on it?
Yeah.
There's not many places in the world, sweet wines aren't in fashion. So not many places have that as a benchmark still. So kudos, you know, to those that kind of sat through and not let the panic get you and put those pieces together.
Yeah. That seems like a fair flight.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all, again, fair, but now the last flight.
Yes. Yeah.
Still fair, but my goodness.
Yes.
So this is the mixed bag flight. Anything goes. I always called it the crapshoot flight because anything goes. So they had a rosé. So you probably, if you took the exam and you saw the rosé, you're probably like, yay, you know, I can describe this. And the rosé was Whispering Angel. And I heard from somebody who actually said Whispering Angel. This is such a popular style wine. It is the epitome of Provence. It is insanely pale. It is, you know, mild aromas. It's dry. The acidity is a little bit more subdued than those high racy ones that you might find in the Loire. So it does sound like a lot of people went to Provence for this rosé. Awesome. And that probably started you out on this flight feeling like a champ. And then the examiners decided to throw you a couple curveballs. Nero d'Avola, and Xinomavro were the two last wines of the day. So Nero d'Avola, interesting. I haven't actually heard from anybody who called it that, and that is okay. If you went somewhere that makes sense, you're going to be absolutely fine. This was a $12 bottle of wine. So factoring that in, this probably was not outstanding. It was not overly complex, very, very fruity. 13% alcohol though, per the label. 50% was aged in French and American oak for around 6 to 8 months. So you probably were getting a little bit of oak character on this. Had a lot of ripe fruit, spicy black fruits. A lot of the tasting notes I read said herbal and eucalyptus. So in my mind, I'd be going to Australia for this. And it does sound like a lot of people thought this was like a Shiraz, something from Australia. Totally makes sense. I think that's an absolutely excellent lateral. But to actually go to Nero d'Avola, I don't know why I would go there. Yeah, somebody just said it was very menthol. So that could be Cabernet-ish, like, so a Bordeaux blend. You know, somebody just said Rioja. If this did have a substantial amount of American oak, that would put you to Rioja. So if you put those in your descriptors, the examiner's going to say, aha, they're linking their theory. This American oak is putting them somewhere logical that makes sense. So I think that is absolutely fine. The thing I'm like, is that quality level. So it's $12, probably just an easygoing, ripe red fruited, fairly simple wine. Hopefully nobody thought this was like some outstanding wine, but if you did, don't worry about it because you can probably make up your points elsewhere. But this was tricky. What would you have, do you have any idea where you might have gone?
I mean, you know, again, nobody knows, you know, with everybody that took the exam, but if I had to make a wager on how many people probably nailed Nero d'Avola on this wine, I'm willing to bet it's probably with single digits of like people, not percent, just single digits of people with that. It's tough. I mean, Italian wines, you know, I mean, you just did a whole series on Italian wines leading up to this, you know, and there are some marks that are distinctive, but a lot of, especially those Southern Italian wines, they are going for an international market that they want to appeal. And so, yeah, it would be tough. I mean, what I would have looked for in my note and tried to, and what you're saying, like connecting the logic, is it's warm fruit.
Yeah.
You know, yes, there's an herbal component, but there's also warm fruit. And so in my conclusion, I would be arguing for somewhere warm and a grape variety that can grow somewhere warm and just punch that argument there. And that's where the points I would be getting for that at.
Yeah. Yeah. I would not get too wrapped up in the fact that this was a fair variety, but relatively obscure, especially, you know, in a vacuum. Italian varieties, if they're in a flight, they're a little bit easier to identify. But in a vacuum, how would you go to? Yeah. And then we've got Xinomavro, which, so this was 13% alcohol, $23. Found that this was aged for a year in French oak and then given an additional 30 months of bottle age. And per decanter, it is really gorgeous with some chewy Nebbiolo character. Well, everybody I've spoken with has gone to pretty much Nebbiolo with this. And understandably, these guys are like almost identical twins with their color, with their structure, with their flavors. So if you went Nebbiolo, totally, I'm guessing I probably would have gone there also.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much overlapping character. And again, with the quality, this maybe was just a little bit below what you would expect from Nebbiolo in Piemonte, perhaps even the entry level. But yeah, I think if you went to any type of Nebbiolo, you're totally fine. But this is tricky. This was a tricky one. I'm not quite sure what they were going for here. If it was kind of a quality thing, and I've kind of racked my brain, Amber, because I'm like, well, because they have to, the examiners have to have thought, most people are going to think this is Nebbiolo. So what, you know, what was their goal in doing this? Was it a quality assessment? Was it to see if people actually funneled it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I would think it had to be along those lines of you know, and we've seen this in past examiners reports where they've thrown in things that are very hard, you know, a
Yeah.
hard flight. And they've said, you know, we weren't necessarily expecting them to get this, but we wanted to see the logic that they were using. And so based on what they've said in past examiner reports, I'm going to assume that's going to be the same ideal as, you know, mixed bag flight traditionally is one of the flights that people score the best on, get the most points, because they're not trying to shoehorn in with the themed flights. And so they just wanted to see you look at the glass, look at the clues here in a vacuum, and just try to piece things together. And where does that lead you?
Yeah. Yeah. So odd.
Yeah. Tip my hat off to the folks that took the exam.
I did too. I mean, I would have loved to have gotten a rosé. It's been a while since I think they had a rosé on. You and I've been talking about it. You did a webinar on rosé. You know, kind of what rosés could come up in a blind flight. Provence is obviously the most obvious suspect. But yeah, so this was a tough exam. Don't let anybody tell you differently. I do think that most people I've spoken with sounds like they did absolutely fine. You're not going to call everything correctly. If you did, fantastic. But, you know, it's really all about your logic. And did you, you know, describe it correctly? Did you talk about suitability for aging? All that stuff. So there's a lot of points to get that are outside of identifying the wine. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody that's joined us. We had a lot of great comments here from folks that took the exam. Really appreciate that. You know, helping to feed in some of that context on there. It looks like the Zeno Mavro was delicious with that.
Yeah.
Which we had a member of our study group from Greece who, for graduation, brought us tons of great Greek wines. And so we had like a little master class in Greece. And yeah, Zeno Mavro is freaking gorgeous. So drink as much of it as you can, because you never know, it might pop up in the next exam. You know,
you never know. Just because it was on this one doesn't mean it's not on the one coming up.
So, they could be priming for a Greece flight, you know.
Yes, they totally could. So yeah, so thanks for joining us, and this is kind of our Motivation Monday. Hopefully if you took it, you're feeling okay. If you're not, please reach out. We did intend this to be a little bit of a mini therapy session, and just step off the ledge. If you think, oh my God, I called this the wrong variety, it's okay. I think you're going to be absolutely fine. This has a high pass rate. You guys studied your ass off. So these were some tough wines. Don't kid yourself. So yeah. So now it's just waiting for what? 15 weeks.
Yeah. So I've spoken to a few people about this. Honestly, just try to put this out of your mind and enjoy your summer. Don't start thinking about it until the calendar at least turns to August. So the rest of this month, June, July, don't even think about it with it. Just August, then you can start worrying about that.
Yep. And we'll be here.
Yep.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Have a good week.
Have a good one.